Hi, it's Miles here at Fabricana, and today we are talking about plaid. I'm going to be making these shorts as an example of working with plaid, but this is not a shorts making video. This is all about technique, working with plaid. I know probably a lot of you love seeing plaids and would love to incorporate some into your wardrobe, but you might be intimidated by the idea of matching plaids, so we're going to solve all of those plaid matching problems. As many of you know from watching me previously in other videos, maybe seeing me in photos on Instagram, I love plaid. I probably have enough plaid in my wardrobe that I should get like an honorary lordship in Scotland, but don't tell my French ancestors, they may not be happy with that. I also want to say before we move on to please follow us on Instagram, follow us on Facebook, please subscribe to this YouTube channel. There's lots of great fun content for fashion, for quilt, for home decor. And if you are making something for yourself, be sure to post it with the hashtag #CreateWithFabricana, and we will try and get you featured on our Instagram page as well. So before we get started, I want to discuss plaid. We all know that plaid is rad. But I also want to say that sometimes there are plaids that are symmetrical and there are some that are asymmetrical. Symmetrical means obviously that at some point there's going to be a mirror image formed on the left and the right, whereas symmetrical wouldn't be a mirror image, it's actually different kind of as it travels from left to right. I just want to quickly visually show you what I mean by that. I'm just going to quickly draw out a symmetrical plaid. So what I've done is I've done kind of one main black line, then the black line's going across as well, and then to the left and right of the black line is a pink line, and then the same thing on the crosswise above and below that. So as you can see, if we consider this our center, the left and the right are mirror images of each other, and this is probably the most popular type of plaid, but there are other plaids that you may find are not. So in that case, if you can see that, so in this case I've done the black stripe up and down and across, and then I've got pink lines just to one side of each of those stripes, and the pink lines above on one side of each of the black stripes. So there's no point on our plaid where we could draw a line and the left and right are the same. This is an asymmetrical plaid, and the method will be slightly different. I'll talk about asymmetrical plaids, but I just want you to understand the difference and to really look at the fabric that you have and know whether you're working with a symmetrical plaid or an asymmetrical plaid. For a lot of you who have watched a bunch of our videos, you've probably seen me in like 6 different plaid pants, so you know I'm a fan of plaid, and I just want to take a second to talk about what we mean by matching a plaid, what this whole video is about, and where the points are going to be obvious about the matching. So thankfully I'm wearing plaid pants today so I can show you on me what we're talking about. So of course with plaid there are vertical and horizontal lines. So both of those are important things to match. So let's just for a second talk about the horizontal lines. So we definitely want them to match across our center front, across the body. We want them to match. Notice how along the side seam, all of the horizontal lines match. And then another thing, because we're making shorts, there's always this kind of pocket facing. It's part of your pocket bag that shows. Well, notice if I hold this flat, the plaid actually does match vertically and horizontally for this little piece. So that's another thing that we're going to be looking at specifically for pants. You may have this in a skirt with pockets. These concepts also apply to a dress or a skirt. We would want to make sure that the whole side seam of the dress or the skirt, the horizontal lines go across. If we're making a shirt, we want to make sure that the horizontal lines continue across the front, the left and right pieces. Down the side seam, we want to make sure that the plaid is centered down the back. So just to give you an idea of the concepts that we're going to be looking at and how they apply to pants, skirts, shorts, shirts, whatever it is you're making. So as I mentioned before, all of the techniques I'm going to show you today apply to other projects, but we are specifically looking at shorts. So I'm going to start with what we're going to see most when we meet people, and that's the front. So here I have my front pattern piece. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm working with symmetrical plaid, and I thought about where I want the plaid to match. And it's actually, and I find this in a lot of ready-made clothes, is that one of the stripes goes right down the pleat line. Even if you don't have a pleat, it's basically the center of that front piece. So I'm looking at my pattern piece, and there is obviously a grain line indicated on this commercial pattern. I'm not sure if that grain line is centered, so all I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the inseam to the side seam, match those up, and then I can see that my grain line actually is indicating the center of my pattern piece. So if I center my grain line on the center of one of the stripes, I know that when I press my pants, I'm always going to have that line as a guide to make sure that I'm pressing them in the right spot. So that being said, again, just if you're making a dress, you'd want to do the same thing. If it's a symmetrical front, you can fold your pattern piece in half, make sure that you have that center line marked, and then you can match that center line of your dress, of your shirt, whatever it is, with the center of one of the vertical stripes. So one of the most important things I'm going to teach you today about cutting with plaids is that you always want to cut single layer. So currently my fabric is folded with the right sides facing, so I'm going to open up my fabric so that I'm only dealing with a single layer. Now the one thing about doing this is I can't lay out my whole pattern before I cut the whole thing, and I know that a lot of people like to place every pattern piece before they start cutting. You're going to have to take a bit of a leap of faith that you have enough fabric for your project. And I'm going to take that pattern piece that I talked about. This is our front piece, and I'm going to try and use my fabric as efficiently as I can. So while trying to match that center front piece, that center front grain line with the center of one of the stripes, I want to get that as close to the selvage as I can. So if I went to the next stripe, I have quite a big gap that's not being used, but I know that I can go to this stripe and know that I'm using my fabric very efficiently. So I can think now as well about where the horizontal lines go. And you can decide, if I know where my hem line is, where do I want that to fall in the pattern? And I would actually rather have the more open part of my plaid, like not where there's a really obvious horizontal stripe. I don't want that at the hem. I would rather have the more open part of the plaid. So again, centering the center front, centered on one main stripe, and then my hem so that I'm not on one of the main crosswise stripes. I don't want to create just a really straight line across the bottom of my shorts. I'm going to pin the vertical line first, just kind of at the top and bottom of my grain line. Then I'm going to start pinning out from that point. So this is the top of my inseam. This is my side seam. Anyway, I'm going to continue to place pins, and then I'll show you cutting out and then how to do the other front piece. So if you're a new sewer and you're confused by any of the terms that I'm using about grain lines or match points or hem markings, seam allowances, please follow along for a video that we have about terms that are used for sewing. So once we have the one pattern piece cut out, we're going to now kind of continue to work across the width of our fabric, get it laying nice and flat. So because we cut it out with the face up, this piece is actually my left front. So now we need to do the right front. So this is going to be a mirror image. So I'm going to kind of take what was the face with the tissue on it, and I'm going to face it to the fabric again. Now I can see the stripes of the fabric, vertical and horizontal now. And again, trying to use my fabric as efficiently as I can. I think I'm going to be able to squeeze this inseam right against the other inseam that I cut out. And we can be really precise here, lining up all of these vertical and horizontal stripes. So now I'm going to pin through all the layers, including the existing tissue. Leaving the tissue in keeps my bias edges, and those are any sort of diagonal lines if you're not familiar with the term bias. Leaving the tissue on, make sure that those lines can't stretch, because it's paper, it's not going to stretch. So just lining them up near the hem. So if you just do a few kind of points in the corners, it'll make it a lot easier to do all of the rest around the piece. Now it's really important to know that a lot of the whole idea of matching when you're sewing is done in the cutting stage. So take the time to really be precise in the cutting, and it'll make the sewing that much easier. So once you're happy with the pins, you can cut out the second piece. So once both of those pieces are pinned, I'm going to take out the pins that I just put in. I'm going to leave the tissue on the other pattern piece, and that will help us when we go to cut out the pocket facing. As you can see, just from a visual, when I lay out these two pattern pieces now, you can see that they're a perfect mirror image of each other. So now that we've got our front pieces cut out, we need to talk about what we want to happen on the side seam. This is our inseam, our fly, and our side seam and our pocket edge. Again, this is very specific to pants, but the same thing applies to a dress or a skirt. What do I want to happen? Obviously, we know that we want all of the horizontal lines to continue across this side seam. But what about the vertical lines? Got to be clear on horizontal and vertical. If we lay, this is actually the back piece. Notice we just have that longer kind of center back. If we lay it on top, we can see that the side seam is exactly the same angle as on the back as it is on the front. So what we can do is actually create a beautiful kind of chevron on the side seam where the vertical lines are creating a mirror image with each other, and I think that is really a pretty way to go. Now what this means is that on the center back, the pleat of the back won't line up with a center stripe. So I hope that makes sense. What we're trying to achieve is a beautiful kind of mirror image, kind of chevron happening on the side seam. Go back to our fabric. We have our face up, just like we did for the front. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my front piece that's already been cut. I'm going to lay it on the same part of the fabric that I did before, so all of the stripes are matching. So this is exactly the same process that we did when we were doing the right side of our pant leg. So I've got those stripes matching vertically and horizontally. So I'm going to lay my back piece lining up my side seam. Now I just want to make sure that the pattern piece is going to fit, and I can see right now that it's going off my pattern. So I need to scooch my piece down to the next row of stripes to give myself enough room to cut out the back. Again, it's really crucial that this side seam line up perfectly, because that's where we're going to see the match points. So now when I lay my back pattern piece on top of that, lining up the side seam, I can see that the back piece will fit on the fabric that I have. So knowing that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a chalk. You can use a fabric marking pencil, whatever it is that you use to mark fabrics. And I'm going to mark those match points. Make sure that whatever you're using you can see really well. On the side seam here, I'm going to do a few marks so I can really see those match points. I'm going to go across the hem. So now that I have those points, I can remove the front piece. You can see my little white chalk marks here. Here's my hem. If I line my pattern piece up with those markings, I can now start to pin. Now this is actually my left back piece, because this is face up. I'm going to do the same thing we did before. Applying pins and then cutting out this piece, and then I can show you how to do the other mirror image piece. So I've cut out the second back piece. We're just going to open it up like we did rustly tissue, you can't hear me, open up like we did with the fronts, and as you can see, the left and right back are perfect mirror images of each other, and we know of the match points that we did. We're going to have a beautiful kind of match point at the side seams. Now we're ready to move on. I'm going to show you how to match that pocket bag on the front. So as we mentioned before, when we're looking at the front, and this is the front, we're looking at the front left side piece right now. We have our pocket here, our pocket opening, and there's going to be a bit of the pocket bag exposed on the front. We want to make sure that all the vertical lines match on the pocket bag and then continue around to the back piece. So to do that, I'm going to take the pocket bag pattern piece and I'm going to overlay it on the front piece. Notice it doesn't match at the waistband because we have pleats in the waistband, so don't worry about that right now. But our matching lines on our pocket, we're going to match up, and then that'll indicate where we're going to place our pocket bag on our plaid. So let's give ourselves a bit more fabric. Again, working face up and single layer. We're gonna lay this out, lining up the vertical and horizontal lines, giving ourselves a bit of fabric around here to have room for the pattern piece. So this is where you see that sometimes working with plaid, I know on commercial patterns it always says allow extra fabric for matching plaids and stripes. Well, this is why you need that extra fabric, is we're losing a little bit of the fabric at the top here that if we weren't working with a plaid wouldn't be a problem. So now I'm going to match up those match points again on the front pocket, and I'm going to pin through the single layer of fabric in a few spots just to hold my pattern piece in place. Now that it's pinned, I can remove the front piece and continue pinning my pattern in place. So just like we did with the front and the back main pattern pieces, I did exactly the same thing with this pocket bag so that I have mirror images of each other. I'm just going to show you kind of visually what we have achieved. So this is actually still the left piece, but we're looking at the back of it. And one of the pocket bags, if I kind of match the points again, you can see that once we get this sewn, that those vertical and horizontal stripes will continue. You probably can't even see where the different pieces are right now. So with that said, I'm gonna run away and magically just get to the point where the shorts are prepared enough that we can sew that side seam, so I can show you exactly how to match while sewing, and then we can see the beautiful finished result of the matching that we've done during the cutting. Woo! And just like that, I have two fronts with pleats and pockets, and two backs with the dart done center and the back. So now we are ready. We're at the point where we can sew our side seam. I can show you how that's going to look. So I'm going to take the right front and the right back. I'm going to put them right sides together at the side seam. Now I can already see, of course, that the horizontal stripes are lining up. So I'm just going to, visually match them. And I'm going to be putting in lots of pins. I do not want my plaid to kind of migrate or move while I'm sewing. So I'm going to, as you know from watching previous videos possibly, I do not use a lot of pins when I'm sewing. But if I'm working with a plaid, I have a lot of matching to do. I'm going to put in pins. Now as you're going, if you put your pins far enough away from your seam allowance, you can flip back your seam allowance and you should be seeing a mirror image in your seam allowance between the front and the back. Now I'm pinning into the pocket bag that we also took time to match up. So these horizontal stripes are lining up there as well, really nicely. Okay, so once that is done, and I'm going to be repeating this process for the left side as well, but I'm just going to show the right. The left side will obviously be the same process, but just reversed. So like I said just a second ago, we're going to be sewing from the hem up. I always do that, whether it's pants or a skirt or a dress or even a side seam on a shirt. It's always better to kind of line up the hem so that you don't have kind of a wavy hem. We're using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance because we're using a commercial pattern. And like I said before, if you're worried about kind of if your plaid is matching, if you just fold back your seam allowance, you can kind of see the mirror image of your plaid. So we're feeling good because I've taken a look. We're going to start with a back stitch. I'm going to remove the pins as I go. Now, if you'd like, another step that you could take is right now as you're sewing, you could just use a basting stitch. That would give you more confidence that you can see that your plaid is matching before you actually put in the final stitch. And like I said before, when we were cutting, the more time you take while cutting, the more confident you can be while sewing. So what we're going to do now is remove it from the machine. I will meet you at the ironing board, and we will take a look at that finished seam. So we are at the ironing board. We're going to start, it doesn't matter if we start from the top or the hem. I'm starting at the waistband here. I'm going to press that nice and flat. I feel like there should be a drum roll happening here, right before the big reveal. All right, here we go. 3, 2, 1. Look at that. See what I was talking about with that beautiful kind of chevron happening? The vertical stripes are a nice mirror image. All the horizontal stripes are continuing across from the back to the front. Even at where the pocket lays, you can see, I'm probably way too excited about this, but the horizontal stripes continue right across the pocket bag. So this is our goal with a shirt, with a blouse, with a skirt, with a dress, is to achieve, I think the side seam is something that we definitely see strongly when wearing a garment. So we're focused on the side seam here. Anyway, that's it. I'm going to continue sewing again through the magic of film. The next time you see these shorts, they will be finished, maybe even on my body. And I'm looking forward to that. But for now, I'm going to go off and do some sewing. So I've realized that I promised you earlier I was going to tell you some advice about working with asymmetrical plaids, and I haven't done that, so we're going to rectify that right now. As you recall, we talked about asymmetrical plaids that are different. They're not mirror image. So like for the shorts that I've just done, if I cut out my right side of my shorts and then I flip that over onto the right where I want to cut out my left side, these lines, when I turn them over, are not going to match. So what I would need to do is just decide where I want my pleat. Remember, we centered our plaid on the pleat, on the crease of our shorts. So let's say I wanted that to be this center pink line here. So I would kind of, when I'm cutting out the right side, I'm just going to draw this very roughly. There's my waist, the crotch, the inseam. So I'm actually, this is my pleat. I would then remove my tissue, flip the tissue over, and match my pleat with that same center pink line. And this isn't really creating a mirror image, but it's balancing that really bold stripe down the center of my leg. If one leg had that really bold stripe going down the center and on the other leg was kind of off to the side, it would look really unbalanced with the finished garment. So just keep that in mind. The technique isn't to just take your pattern piece and flip it over and do a mirror image. It's about kind of cutting everything right side up and making sure that your pattern is balanced across the width of your garment. The same technique applies for the crosswise stripes. That doesn't change, but for your vertical stripes, you'll have to cut it face up, not mirror image, but focusing on balance. Okay, everybody, I've got my shorts finished and I'm ready to try them on. Here we have them. I'm so excited. I'm ready for summertime. I love how the plaid kind of matches up and down. You can see that beautiful chevron on the side seams. So I hope this video has taken some of the mystery out of working with plaids, cutting and sewing. I want to remind you to follow us on Facebook and Instagram, subscribe to this YouTube channel. There's lots of great content for fashion, for home decor, and quilt and craft. So again, thank you so much for joining us today, and we will see you next time. Sew true and be you.